Hey there, welcome to Takeaway with Sam Oches, a podcast from Nation's Restaurant News. I am Sam Oches, editor-in-chief here at NRN, and this is the show where I give you an all-access pass to the restaurant industry's most influential decision-makers. This week, I'm talking with Nicolas Jammet, the co-founder and chief concept officer of Sweetgreen, the fast casual that has been changing customer perception of healthy and locally sourced ingredients since 2007. Sweetgreen has, of course, been a touch point for fast casual innovation ever since its early days, and it's especially been seen as a tech innovator as it's been on the leading edge of tech innovations such as digital and mobile ordering. Now, while Sweetgreen continues to innovate with technology, as evidenced by its automated infinite kitchen prototype that it plans to roll out to about half of its locations, it has spent the past few years refocusing the narrative on its menu innovation and the quality of its sourcing. Nicolas joined the podcast to talk about how Sweetgreen has really leaned into the story of its food in the past few years as it approaches 250 locations in 22 states, with its sights set on 1,000 locations by 2030. In this interview, you will learn more about why the evolving nature of convenience is affecting menu innovation, why your ingredients and your suppliers are worth celebrating, and why technology may enable innovation, but it's food that your customers are coming for. Also, I'm excited to share with you that this episode of Takeaway is brought to you by 86 Repairs, a restaurant equipment and maintenance solution that is built for operators. We are including on this episode a bonus conversation with 86 Repairs CEO Daniel Estrada, who joined me to talk about why the old way of managing repairs and maintenance is broken and how there is a huge opportunity to improve margins by optimizing R&M. Be sure to stick around for that interview to learn more about how to proactively manage your repairs and maintenance and improve your margins in the meantime. Jumping now into my interview with Sweetgreen's Nicolas Jammet. Also, don't forget to stick around after the interview, as I will share my 7 takeaways from this discussion, actionable insights that you can take with you on the go. All right, I'm sitting down with Nicolas Jammet, the Chief Concept Officer and co-founder of Sweetgreen. Nick, thanks for taking some time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so Nick, I want to talk about the menu at Sweetgreen. I was just telling you before we hit record. Of course, I've had your fellow co-founder Nathaniel Rue on the podcast, and we've talked about the loyalty program. And for years, I've been in this industry now for 15 years, and I've had the fortune of talking to you guys several times. And often I find that we're talking about your technological innovations and how you guys are really winning at the tech side of things. And as I told you recently, it feels like the media has really picked up on the narrative of Sweetgreen as this tech company. But you guys have done a phenomenal job, I think, in the past few years of really reclaiming the narrative of Sweetgreen as a food company, first and foremost. And there's been some great food innovations that have come out onto the menu. And I wanted to dig into that specifically with you and talk about how much the menu is really paving the way now for the future of Sweetgreen, which is 17 years in at this point. So considering that 17 years now, let's go back to 2007 when you guys started this company. I mean, the menu at that point in time, sort of the build your own salad. Tell me about your sort of philosophy on why that was the menu you guys really started out with.
In 2007, it's really funny going back to just understanding the food landscape and just the conversation on food that was happening. So much of why we started Sweetgreen was because we didn't see options out there that celebrated where we thought food was going and should go. And so we saw this opportunity to redefine fast food and ultimately build community through food. And so we wrote this business plan in our dorm room, raised, $350,000 from friends and, family and old bosses, people we met on planes, like anyone that would give us money. And again, the idea was pretty simple, was to just create a brand and business that celebrated a certain kind of food ethos that was good for you, that made you feel good. And so that's how Sweetgreen started in 2007. And you have to remember, this was around the time of the conversation on food and consumers' connection to food was completely changing. It was, fast food nation, super size me. A year later, Michelle Obama in the White House talking about food on a platform, on such a big platform. So it was this kind of like awakening around food. And so we saw it as a really exciting time to start Sweetgreen. And so ultimately for us, it was about creating food that we thought could be craveable, customizable, something you could eat every day. And so for us, starting with this core category of salads and bowls, and actually at the time it was wraps and soft serve froyo. And so kind of something for every part of your day, every part of your week, and something that was, because it was so highly customizable, could fit your whatever your dietary needs were, your preferences, the flavors you like, and was food you could eat every day and feel really good about.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned froyo. Almost forgot about the froyo part of this, because froyo was the sweet, right? And then you had the green in the south. Why did froyo end up disappearing? Was it just too much operationally and too complex?
If you look back over the 17 years, our menu, the ethos has stayed incredibly strong and consistent at the center of it, but our menu has evolved pretty dramatically over the years. We started leaning way more into seasonality and seasonal bowls and seasonal ingredients, and celebrating all the incredible farmers we were connecting with and the supply chain we were building. And for a number of years, we really, and this I guess connects back to your question on technology, we focused so heavily on building out our channels, our new channels, and just making it even easier for customers to order our food and interact with our brand. And, part of the thesis early on was that, when we were even writing the business plan was, healthy food had a branding problem and a convenience problem and a craveability problem. You could find healthy food. It just generally wasn't always the food people crave the most. It wasn't the easiest to get. It wasn't built into a brand experience that made consumers really excited. And so we wanted to change all those things. But part of the premise was, and, we were the customers, we were building this for ourselves, but because we were first-time entrepreneurs and students, we stayed very kind of obsessed around understanding the customer and where they were going. And the thesis was that, this idea of convenience was really going to shift. And when we opened our first doors in 2007, I remember customers saying, wow, this is so convenient. I can walk downstairs 3 blocks away, wait 15 minutes in line and get whatever I want. This is great. How convenient, right? And fast forward 5 years later, they're like, I have to walk downstairs 3 blocks away and I have to wait 15 minutes in line. That's not convenient. And so we saw that, trying to look at where the consumer was going and how to continuously think about an experience that removes friction to getting our food. And so we really wanted to invest in building out, our pickup channel, and then ultimately delivery, and then ultimately Outpost, and just making it even easier for customers to get this food every day. So much of our energy went on building out those channels. And so our menu evolved as our channels evolved, and they were all kind of connected as well.
Sure. Well, it's so interesting too. I mean, considering again 2007 and what was going on in the state of the restaurant industry then. You mentioned Super Size Me, Fast Food Nation. Obviously, there was such a surge in concepts built around fresh and farm to table to some degree. Certainly healthy salad, and you guys are really out ahead of that. And you mentioned all this evolution. I'm curious about that menu evolution that's happened over the years. How much is it? Some of it's by necessity because of the competition, because you guys really set the tone for so many other salad fast casuals in particular that came after you. Is some of this just a competitive evolution to stay top of mind?
Yeah, I think when we look at the evolution of our menu, we look at just, continuing to broaden and reach more customers and just wanting to appeal to more people at different parts of their day in life. Competition is definitely something we're mindful of, but we try to really stay more focused on the customer and what they want. And, there's been this balance over the years, no matter how much we've grown and been able to invest in incredible things like our insights team and the data and understanding our customer from that point of view. But we also try to understand the world on food and our beliefs around our food ethos and where we think it should go. So it's this constant balance of listening to the customer, but also trying to decide where we want to lead them. And so a lot of times when you look at some of the evolutions on our menu, or even some of our largest stories we tell on our menu, whether it's some of these collaborations with chefs or farmers, it's not things that we hear in the insights that customers want, and I'll give you a great example. A few years ago, we had this really incredible moment with Chef Dan Barber, who's probably been one of the voices and chefs that has inspired Sweetgreen the most in so many ways. And so we did this collaboration with him around his new company called Row 7 at the time, new company. And he was breeding seeds for flavor. So breeding vegetables for flavor, which sounds obvious, but today in modern agriculture, seeds are generally bred for durability, for how they travel, for color, for size, for yield, all those things, and not as much for flavor. And so he built this whole business around this, and we said, okay, let's breed a squash. let's kind of create this squash that is bred to be the most delicious squash. And so he had this, we came up with this seed that he was working on called Robin's Kogi Nut Squash. And we said, okay, we'll take 100,000 seeds. We'll plant it in 6 farms across the country, 23 acres, with some of our great farmer partners who, by the way, they love that idea more than anything. They thought it was so fun. And these things came out of the ground a few months later, and we had this campaign around meet the new squash, the Kogi Nut Squash, and literally had Dan Barber on a billboard in Times Square holding up a squash. And so things like that is just, we want to celebrate ingredients and celebrate an ingredient like that the same way the greatest brands celebrate their consumer products. And so that was a moment where, we didn't see that in Insights, but we wanted to tell great stories around food and farmers.
That's so interesting. I think about that story, and I think about it in the context of McDonald's is not doing this, right? McDonald's, famously with its supply chain, and it develops a dish and it's got to make sure about 3 years in advance that the world's supply can sustain something like that. So it's not going to, come up with a new squash and not, develop some new seeds. But I mean, and I bring that up because Sweetgreen is 200 plus locations now, right? I mean, you guys can't just do some of these things at scale now. So how do you balance that? Because being at scale with all these locations in 22, 23 states, how do you manage to still pursue that ethos that you talk about?
Yeah. And, when I look at massive supply chains like that, I mean, those are impressive operations. And so much of even how you think about distribution and planning and all the different parts that go into building a supply chain are really exciting in that sense. But for us, as we've scaled, we're now in, almost 250 restaurants in 22 states around the country, most regions. And, we've spent a lot of time really staying focused on the core food ethos, this kind of standard we have around what we source, how we source. It's, there's specifics for every category, from how we source our greens to animal proteins to grains, so there's a double and triple click on everything in our food ethos. And so much of it is just, a lot of planning as well, looking at, our supply a year or two out, trying to make sure that we're working with the right growers, farmers, partners that are either growing this way or, finding folks that want to grow with us. Another interesting and a funny or anecdote that I love to tell is a lot of our farmers, we looked at the relationship in a longer term lens. So we actually track farmer tenure. We want to work with these farmers and growers for multiple years, for our benefit, for their benefit. We want the long-term relationship. And for a lot of growers and farmers, that's great. It works. It doesn't work for everyone. But, we have some farmers we've been working with since almost, the beginning. One that we actually just had a really great story come out about Firefly Farms. It was our first goat cheese farmer ever. When we had 2 restaurants, we started working with them. And 15 years later, we're still working with them today. And, we've 10x'd what we buy from them. They source goat cheese for us in the whole DC, Virginia, Maryland, Philly area. And so for us, it's about investing in relationships like that and giving them, volumes to say, hey, this is how much we're going to need next year, and just having a really strong demand planning team so they can grow and make the investments in their team and their production. And so, but it's also then working with some of the largest, organic growers and farmers in the country. And as our scale grows, we have the ability to also shift how things are grown. And that's actually one of the things that excites me the most about our ability as we get to scale is, we talk a lot about even something like transitioning land. Now we have enough demand where we can go to farmers and say, hey, would you want to transition your land? And we'll pay you the premium for that from conventional to organic. And let's work on increasing organic supply in regions that we want that.
Sure. So if I go back, 15 years, Sweetgreen in its infancy still, the trend has really taken hold, right? I mean, I think that, and I say that word trend just in terms of the movement toward, fresher, healthier, more locally sourced, fast casual in particular, really starts to take off in the couple of years after you guys have really planted roots. That using that word trend is also strategic here because to some degree, I think, a lot of companies jump in because they think, oh, here's a trend. I want to ride some coattails. Of course, you're not going to make it very far if you're doing this for the sake of a trend or for a fad. And some buzzwords come and go. And I guess I ask all this to ask you, how much has Sweetgreen had to navigate around some of the trendiness of some things? Because Farm to Fork, as an example, I think had its moments where we talked about it a lot. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's still there. But as a media narrative, as a buzzy kind of thing for customers, it's maybe fallen a little bit toward the background. So how much do you guys navigate around those things in the evolution of Sweetgreen's menu?
As we think about the menu evolving, again, we stay very focused on the core ethos. And what's exciting is that ethos for us is just, it's a specific supply chain and approach to sourcing ingredients, but it doesn't constrain what's on our menu. And so, we have this, core category of bowls and salads that is where Sweetgreen started. But since then, we've really expanded the menu, and we're continuing to into other categories and products that, really speak to a broader set of customers. Again, all based on that ethos. So what's exciting is I think, we stay true to the food ethos, but, we have this really exciting mandate to make sure that as we grow, our menu can broaden in the right ways to meet customers and their needs. And, a year and a half ago, we launched our newest category called protein plates, which are these entrees that have no greens in them. And it's really on, regenerative grains, awesome hearty proteins at the center of the plate, some roasted veg, our, collection of sauces on them. And it just appealed to a whole new set of customers. Also have been performing really strongly at dinner. So again, we're trying to understand our customer and how they were feeling in the world today. I think price value at dinner was something we heard a lot about. So being able to get dinner options for, $15 to $20 from with ingredients and attributes, clean attributes of food that you can trust, that is delicious and craveable and hearty, we heard was becoming harder and harder to find. So really expanding the range of our menu has been exciting. After that, we then launched steak, which was a really fascinating supply chain for us to learn, our first time ever having red meat on the menu. And so for us, we built our ethos around beef and that animal protein that as we learned that we're really excited and proud of. But the ethos itself is just an approach to food. And so where our menu evolves, it'll continue to evolve, which is exciting, but it'll all be based on that food ethos.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up sort of the consumer role in this because, of course, I mean, restaurant industry, more so than most other industries, I think is just changing and evolving so quickly. And certainly when you see social media come in and you see TikTok come in and have this influence of, I think one example I've used recently is that spicy trend, right? Where it's like suddenly that's on TikTok. So restaurants feel sort of this pressure to jump in and offer something for spicy. So it appeals to that TikTok customer. And then it's gone. And it's just such a fleeting thing. And for Sweetgreen, 250 restaurants, you cannot just jump on a fleeting trend like that, of course, because you have to have that preparation in the supply chain and all of that. But how does Sweetgreen tap into trends or tap into, that consumer sort of zeitgeist and follow along with that when it takes into consideration when it's developing these new dishes? How much can you pull in versus how much is it you saying, we're telling the customers that this is what's around the corner instead of the other way around?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for us, it's a balance. I think what's really exciting I think the greatest brands out there are moving at the speed of culture. And so when things pop up, in a way that makes sense for your brand and your product, how do you respond or join that conversation? You can't join every conversation. So I think having some restraint and knowing when and how to jump into those conversations is great. I think for us, we look at the trends not only within food, but also, in other categories. So I'll give you an example. We just had our, a big seasonal launch, our Brussels sprouts bowl that we launched this year and really based on our version of our harvest bowl with these maple glazed Brussels sprouts. And to celebrate that, there's a trend around, an ingredient like Brussels and maple, and I think the flavors of maple and really celebrating that. But to launch it, we partnered with this incredible creator couple called Aki and Koichi, who have been creating a lot of trends in more of the fashion space. And they do these kind of, interesting videos with their fit checks. And so we brought them out to the Brussels field and did all this incredible content with them in our Brussels field. And it speaks to a broader audience and a different audience. And so for us, it was really exciting to look at, trends not only on the flavor side, but also on the storytelling of how do we want to tell the story around the incredible farmers we're working with. We were excited to tell the story of Dynasty Farms, in Santa Maria, California, one of our partners we've been working with for years. And, having these fashion influencers on a farm with our farmer and making content together was the connecting of these two worlds. And, it created what I think was some of the best content we've ever made. And so it's really about, understanding how we can tell our story in the best way.
I love that idea of the story of the food, and especially in this day and age of content and creators, obviously story being so important to getting the attention of customers, but putting that behind the food, because that was ultimately what Farm to Table was trying to do, right? And continues to do, which is tell the story of the food. But in the pre-TikTok days, you have more limited ways of telling that story. So I really appreciate that. But I did want to then ask about the sort of seasonality of Sweetgreen's menu, because this great dish, Brussels, checking a lot of boxes for a lot of people. Big Brussels fan over here. So I don't think it was on the menu when you and I were at Sweetgreen a couple weeks ago, but I'm going to make sure to swing by to try it soon. How much do you then, when you have a seasonal dish, how are you responding to then the sales? If it blows up, are you trying to, let's blow this out and put it on the permanent menu? What are the considerations for something like that?
What's really exciting about our food ethos is, aside from, I said there's so many attributes we look at when sourcing so many ingredients, but celebrating the seasonality and regionality of our food supply is really exciting, because we get to celebrate ingredients when they're at peak season and coming back, and it tells the story of the seasons and the land and agriculture, and connecting our customers to that story and that cycle and that seasonality, again, through different, partnerships and campaigns and just different ways of telling those stories is really exciting. And, we have a couple moments, seasonal moments every year that come back that are some of our best selling moments of the year. And it's all based on that premise of like, we're sourcing this ingredient at peak season from these farms. And so, in the past, there's moments where we've tried to keep things on the core menu versus sunsetting them. And, in a funny way, we sometimes internally joke about like the McRib effect. It's like that, that peak moment when something, and a McRib is not a seasonal ingredient in the sense of agriculture, but is this celebration of this thing that comes back. Pumpkin spice latte, I guess, is the best example of this. Celebrating this, time of year, changing of the seasons, changing of, in your calendar. And, for me, it's, when peaches come on the Sweetgreen menu in the summer, there's nothing, this is one of my favorite moments. And so really understanding to celebrate that moment and celebrate when it's at peak and celebrate the farmers. And, for years, we're really excited to work with some of these chefs and tell stories through chefs, because they have really become rock stars in culture, which is awesome. We think farmers deserve equal billing up there as rock stars. So we're excited to celebrate them as well.
Well, it's certainly the first time I've heard a comparison between McRib and Sweetgreen, but I'm here for it. I think we should make that comparison more often. It's just too funny not to. But okay, so thinking about this narrative I mentioned at the outset of our conversation, that narrative of Sweetgreen as a tech company, I think it was especially potent when you guys went public. And, the public markets especially, I think, are more interested in technology of a restaurant than our local sourcing, right? That appeals perhaps maybe to some investors. I'm mostly curious because I'm in the media, so that narrative was really strong, with us in the media, and it's what I'm hearing from other people. I think we're putting that down. Was that palpable to you guys? Were you sensing this, like, oh, people really perceive us as a tech company more than a food company now?
At a certain moment, that message became really strong of people kind of describing us in that way, and we really had to refocus and say, calibrate that we are a food company, run by people, and ultimately technology enables our mission, enables us to bring that food to life. And, I think why that narrative started, and, it's exciting in so many ways, but we were very early movers on so many parts of integrating and leveraging and building technology into the experience. We were one of the first in our category to have an ordering app. We built this really strong digital connection with our consumer. The pickup shelves as you see them today was really like pioneered in a Sweetgreen by some of our team members in one of our Boston restaurants almost a decade ago. And then obviously with investments in, our native app, and then most recently automation, we've always been kind of a pioneer and first mover on so many parts of technology. But at the end of the day, all those, this incredible technology platform and digital connection we have with our customer is in service of our food and just enables us to grow as a food company.
Yeah. So were there ever conversations then about like, how do we reclaim this? Because then as I mentioned, and I'm certainly projecting here because these are my own opinions, but watching this so closely, watching the space so closely, it felt like there was an intentional shift, and you guys did such a phenomenal job. As I was just telling you a few weeks ago, it was very obvious to me how much you guys had really reclaimed that there had been this period of time where it was like, I haven't said anything about Sweetgreen's tech in years. It felt like I'm suddenly talking about Sweetgreen's menu all the time. And that to me seemed like a big win for you guys. Like, was some of that strategic? How much did you want to put food more front and center?
Food's always been so front and center, but to your point, I think, we had so many exciting launches around tech. That part of that was wanting to make sure that we keep our core message, our ethos, our product at the center of our narrative. And so much of it is just around telling the right stories around our product. So there was definitely some intentionality there. And especially as we grow and as we scale, really what makes Sweetgreen so special is that approach to food, from how we source it to how we prep it to the flavors in the restaurant and ultimately the breadth of our menu. And so really celebrating that and making sure we're telling those stories is definitely core to Sweetgreen.
Of course, I should say, you guys do still continue to invest in tech. And so looking at something like the infinite kitchen model, you guys are working automation in the back of the house to find efficiencies in the operation of Sweetgreen, which is, of course, all over the industry. Everybody's looking for ways that automation can do that, bring those efficiencies. But infinite kitchen, something you've been very public about. That's still a part of your narrative, I guess you should say. With those kinds of investments, how much do you have to balance these two things? This, sort of authentic, of the earth, farm to table, working with farmers on one end, but on the other end, robots in the kitchen and automation. Like, does that ever seem a little bit dichotomous to you? How do you bring those two things together in an authentic way?
When we started the automation journey, it was interesting because, as John, Nate, and I often talk about the future of the industry, future of Sweetgreen, one of the new, beliefs we had a few years ago was that automation was going to be one of the next great platform shifts in food. And it's a lot harder than software, obviously, because it's, there's building, equipment and technology from a hardware point of view that fits different restaurants can be challenging. But, so we started to invest in it ourselves. And at the same time, we met the founders of Spice, who, it felt very, like kind of meant to be. They had started their company with the same mission as Sweetgreen. Same intentions, wanting to scale healthy food and using technology as a platform to enable that. And so, we joined forces 3 years ago now, acquired them. And, that team is really brilliant. I give them a lot of credit. And they're all still here building the same mission together with us. And, for us, so much of building the Infinite Kitchen is really about thinking more about the experience and ultimately the product that comes out of the machine. And, we kind of see the Infinite Kitchen as this culinary co-pilot that prepares the salads, bowls, plates, and allows our team to really focus more on the guests and the fresh prep, and then putting the finishing touches on each order. There's a finishing station after the Infinite Kitchen. But it's really meant and designed to kind of create a better experience for our guests and our team members, focusing on things like order accuracy, portion consistency, order throughput, lowering food waste, and just providing more time for our team members to really think about that sense of hospitality. Whenever I walk into we have 7 of them live now. And when you walk in, you see these interactions that, just are really hard to happen in a classic Sweetgreen at peak, lunch rush, line out the door, trying to get and create as many, connections with customers and create their bowls in a fast, accurate way. But in this Infinite Kitchen model, you see this sense of connection with our guests where a team member can, we have these new host positions where they're in the front of house and they get to kind of welcome the guests and see, especially if someone is a new customer, to spend 2 or 3 minutes with them, explaining to them what Sweetgreen is, helping them navigate the menu, pointing out our source board to talk about all the farmers. And at the same time, behind them, the Infinite Kitchen is making 500 bowls an hour. And so it's this incredible actually shift of allowing our team members to focus more on hospitality and connecting with our guests.
Yeah, that's great. Staying with sort of the operational innovation of Sweetgreen, you guys also, in the past few years, you developed a drive-through prototype. You've expanded into that world, which, of course, 10, 15 years ago, so much of fast casual was opposed to that. But technology coming such a long way to where drive-through makes a lot of sense for a concept like Sweetgreen. And to me, when I think about that evolution, I imagine that unlocks a lot of potential for growth into new communities where you can go into more suburbs or even ex-urban areas with these drive-throughs and with this accessibility. How important then do those kinds of operational innovations become to deliver this better food ethos to customers who probably don't really have those options in their community?
Mm-hmm. As we talk about the evolution of Sweetgreen, and we've talked about the new channels, the menu evolution, and I think our formats are definitely a place where we've also experimented and evolved and broadened. And so And honestly, the Infinite Kitchen being at the center of that, I think as we look today at what that unlocks for us. And, 250 restaurants, we're in so many major cities. And as we now start to really open up where we can open and where we want to open, having that range of formats and one being vehicular with our Sweet Lane is so incredibly important. And so we're at the early stages there and still learning. But again, it kind of comes back to the premise of just how do you remove as much friction for customers as possible with our food and just make it, easy and exciting. And so for us, seeing the first Sweet Lane and how it's performed and our, customers' reaction to it, it's been really exciting. So definitely more to come there, and it's something we want to invest in.
So thinking of the evolution then of Sweetgreen's menu, you guys went from, customizable to signature. You went from, you added plates from lunch into more dinner too. You've added proteins like steak. You're bringing more seasonality into the menu. What's next? As you see it, because you guys clearly are tapping into the opportunities for where you can, as you said, tap into those the new customer potential. What is left to tap into as you guys see it?
We feel like we're right at the beginning of a really exciting moment of evolution around our menu and product and how we talk to customers about those products. We've really made some exciting investments in our team, and from our head of marketing to head of culinary, to really think about, the Sweetgreen menu and breadth of offering that we want to see over the next few years. And so, you'll see a lot more testing from us just to really play with some exciting additions to the menu, from ingredients, flavors, proteins, even a new core category possibly. So, still early days. So, not talking too much about it yet, but, when we're ready to talk about it, we'll definitely come your way.
I appreciate that. All right, then last question then for you, Nick, segueing into, you guys have said you guys want 1,000 locations of Sweetgreen by 2030. So, that's 6 years away, lots of growth ahead for this company. Going back to what we were talking about sort of at scale, and you think about a brand like a McDonald's, which of course is just different than everybody and far different from Sweetgreen, but still considering what you can accomplish at scale, like 1,000 locations. And you were just talking about developing your own squash, right? Like that's unheard of at scale like that, right? What do you think is possible for Sweetgreen in the long run as you guys really lean into being a menu forward, food forward company, but at the scale of major chains? What do you guys hope to have accomplished? What kind of influence do you hope to have had on the American dining habit?
As we look at scaling Sweetgreen, what's really exciting is we see this future where, more and more consumers are thinking differently about their relationship with food and ultimately how that affects their health. But also, for us building, we believe we can build the next great American food brand and really be ubiquitous and, think about accessibility and craveability and be something that every guest can connect with. And so for us, we look at our TAM and seeing it growing is really exciting. And so that number of 1,000, excited to get to that, but, we think there's definitely more after that. And so for us, I think just continue to tell the right stories in food, invest in our supply chain. Like I said, as we get more scale, we believe we have the power to really affect how things are grown, what inputs go into how they're grown, and really start to tell stories around that so consumers care about it. And ultimately, investing in this new engine just really reimagines the fast food experience from a customer point of view and a team member point of view. Really excited about seeing how our team members are loving the new Infinite Kitchen. It's a different experience for them as well. And so, so much of Sweetgreen's evolution and growth towards the 1,000+ restaurants is really about, staying very focused on execution and really, having the right plans year to year. But it's also just about reimagining the future we want to see from our supply chain all the way to our restaurant experience.
It's very exciting. Looking forward to watching over the next couple of years how you guys can continue that evolution. So Nicolas Jammet, the co-founder, chief concept officer of Sweetgreen, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
That was my interview with Sweetgreen's Nicolas Jammet. So what should you learn from this interview? Here are my 7 takeaways. My first takeaway is that the evolving nature of convenience is affecting menu innovation. Sweetgreen is really emblematic of the shift that the fast casual industry especially, but really all of restaurants have undergone in the past 17 years that Sweetgreen has been around. When they first opened their doors in 2007, everything was about customization. That convenience to customers was being able to get what you want when you wanted. And Nicolas mentioned in this interview, he kind of joked that at that time, convenience was seen as having healthy food served quickly and just down the block from where you might live. Nowadays, obviously, convenience has totally shifted. The definition of convenience has shifted to where customers want convenience. They want food on demand. They want it where they are, when they are, and they want it delivered right to them on their couch, basically. And Sweetgreen has had to adapt. So whereas customization was king back in 2007 and the years after that, these days, signature items actually become a little bit more easy to deliver. And having the shelf with your pickup station, the outpost that Sweetgreen has had, being able to, as Nicolas says, remove friction from this whole process to create convenience so that that food can get from the restaurant to the customer as quickly and efficiently as possible. That has led them to making the decisions around their menu. So whereas, again, customization was bigger, now they've refined their menu around more signature bowls, and they've added plates to really fill out the dinner day part. So point being is that the nature of convenience and how it has evolved over the past 15 to 17 years has affected how Sweetgreen has developed its new menu items, and I'm sure it has affected how you think about menu R&D as well. My second takeaway is that with proper planning, restaurants can scale farmer relationships and their potential. Back when Sweetgreen was a new brand and they were starting to catch people's attention around the country, farm to table was a trend that was starting to catch on, and it was trickling down from fine dining to casual dining and even into fast casual. Sweetgreen was one of those fast casuals that really took hold of this farm to table movement and tried to include it in their own sourcing practices, tried to have local farmers, and very successfully, I might add, they were able to do that. But farm to table, I would argue, over the years has become less and less of a priority for customers as they focus on things like lower prices, higher quality, but at lower prices. Technology, as it's taken over and driven that convenience, the farm to table movement, in my opinion, has taken a little bit more of a back seat than it once had. The other piece that really got in the way of these farm to table restaurants and these relationships with local farmers, of course, is always scale. And how do you scale that relationship? Well, I've got good news for you, and that's that Sweetgreen is kind of proving that you can have those relationships at scale. And Nicolas talked about this in the interview. He pointed out some of the farmers they've been working with since the early days, and they've been able to bring those farmers with them as Sweetgreen has grown to almost 250 locations in 22 states. One of the ones he pointed out was Firefly Farms, which provided goat cheese for Sweetgreen. And Nicolas mentioned that they now use about 10 times as much goat cheese now as when they started using them several years ago. And that's a great example of how you can source high quality foods in a fast casual setting at scale, but you've got to properly scale that relationship. That's what Sweetgreen has been doing for all these years. They've been scaling those relationships. Another important part that he pointed out, and as I mentioned, there's the potential of those relationships, is that Nicolas said that they've been able to transition a lot of the land of these farmers they work with to transition the land into organic sourced foods. And they can do that because, again, of the scale. At scale, you have power. Sweetgreen has power to be able to go to a farm and say, we know how much of this ingredient we need. We have almost 250 restaurants, and so clearly we're going to buy it in bulk. And because we're going to commit to you sourcing all of this product from your farm, we want you to transition over to organic farms. So again, you can have ethically sourced foods. You can have locally sourced foods at scale, but you have to work on that relationship and walk alongside that provider so that they can scale alongside with you. My third takeaway is that there is opportunity in the story of your food. Sweetgreen's always been so good about this, about telling the story of their ingredients, telling the story of their food. Story is so important to the farm to table movement and how you want to see that farm. You want to see those ingredients, and you want to know that the food that is sitting in front of you on the table came from that farm that you're told it came from. You want to know that the journey it took to get from that farm to that table was a short one, and that it was taken care of every step of the way. The story of that food isn't just a good way to source better ingredients and a good way to connect your customers to the food. It's obviously a great marketing opportunity too. And in this day and age, with content being so critically important on social media like TikTok and Instagram, you have an opportunity to tell the story of your own food, whether or not you're sourcing locally, whether or not you're investing in some of these farmer relationships as Sweetgreen does. you have an opportunity to tell the story of your menu, of your food. A couple examples that Nicolas gave in this interview, he pointed out the coming up with a whole new squash variety in partnership with Chef Dan Barber, who, of course, is a celebrity chef who's done a lot of work around farm to table. They worked with him to develop an entirely new breed of squash that they served on the menu at Sweetgreen. And that's an incredible story to say the squash on your plate did not exist before, but we worked with a chef to breed this squash specially for flavor so that you might have a better squash on your plate. Another story that he told, or that they are telling actively, is around the Brussels sprouts that Sweetgreen just rolled out, this Brussels sprouts bowl. They've partnered with creators on TikTok to go see the Brussels sprouts farms, to tell the story on their platforms around the journey of these Brussels sprouts into a Sweetgreen bowl. Again, content today is king and has always been king, in my opinion. But content as king on the social platforms, it gives you that opportunity to tell the story of your food in a unique and creative way. My fourth takeaway is that your ingredients and your suppliers are worth celebrating. So related to my last point about telling the story of your food, when you tell the story of your food, make sure you uplift those who are supplying your food, whether that's farmers, whether it's even someone along the supply chain, the distributor, whoever it is in that process of getting the food to your restaurants and onto the table for the customer. Celebrate those people. Nicolas was pointing out that Sweetgreen has really gone seasonal in their menu launches, right? So they work around seasonal ingredients and develop these seasonal menus based on what is available. And by going seasonal, as he pointed out, they're celebrating that ingredient because they're recognizing when it's at peak. And not just, obviously, it's good for business because that's when you have the most of it available, but that's when that ingredient is the freshest and the most delicious. And they are celebrating that. Then they celebrate the farmers who come alongside them in that. How can you celebrate your own suppliers? How can you tell their story and celebrate the suppliers and the foods, the ingredients that you're serving in a unique way, again, that catches the attention of the customer? My fifth takeaway is that technology may enable innovation, but it is food that your customers are coming for. So one of the reasons why I wanted to chat with Nicolas is because I had the notion, certainly in food service media, I have a little bit more of a front row seat in this, but you may have sensed this as well, that for a long time, when we talked about Sweetgreen, we often talked about Sweetgreen and its tech innovation. Here was this, upstart, nimble, fast casual that was adapting all of this new technology like digital ordering, mobile ordering. And often we talked about it through the lens of this tech-forward company that was growing and not as much about its food. Lately, the last couple of years, I had sensed that was shifting. I could tell that anytime I was hearing about Sweetgreen, talking about Sweetgreen, it was around the food, the quality of the food, the new dishes they were rolling out, the focus on food that they had in their marketing materials and at their restaurants. Nicolas talked about the fact that is intentional, that, to some degree with intentionality, they really pushed food forward. But I loved what he especially had to say around technology and the role in Sweetgreen. Of course, technology plays a big role. They have their Infinite Kitchen prototype, which is an automated kitchen they're rolling out. They want to roll out to 50% of their restaurants. That's very tech forward, obviously. But tech is not the end product. Tech is not why people come. They come for the food, for the quality, the flavors, for the craveability. And tech enables Sweetgreen to really do that better. He pointed out, for example, how by having an automated kitchen, you're able to increase the hospitality that you give to the customers. You can explain and educate the ingredients to them. That's one way they're able to put the quality of the food forward because of technology. Keep that in mind for your own restaurant. There are a lot of bells and whistles out there with technology, and some of them are great, and some of them are going to help you do your business better and maybe increase your profit margins, but they are not your main product. Your main product is food, and your food, first and foremost, has got to be craveable, desirable. And if it is, then you can use technology to really capture the attention of the customers, make sure they come in and try that food. My sixth takeaway related to what I was just talking about is that automated kitchen equipment should complement your food quality. So again, when you talk about something like the Infinite Kitchen model and the automated system that it represents, kind of this robotic system that builds the bowls for the customers at Sweetgreen. I mentioned that hospitality and how it affords team members to really get front of house and educate guests on the customers. But Nicolas even pointed out, they can increase the amount of food they can serve. They can help the employees focus on better prep of the ingredients. All of it is in the name of quality of the food. So while you might walk in and be amazed at this automated kitchen that's building your salad or bowl, that's cool. That's the bells and whistles, but it's all in the name of better food. So that automated kitchen equipment that is becoming, more and more popular, and that's more and more restaurants are adopting. At the end of the day, it should serve the purpose of elevating food quality. My seventh and final takeaway is that the great American food brands find the right balance of accessibility and craveability. This was what we closed our conversation on. Nicolas was explaining how him and his co-founders at Sweetgreen, they want to be the next great American brand, and they believe that having craveable food provided accessibly is the answer to doing that. And if you look at history and all of the major restaurant companies that have been able to accomplish becoming these iconic brands, that's what they've done too. Start with the craveable food, and then lean into the tools you have at your disposal to make it accessible to the customers so they can taste that delicious food for themselves. Those are all my takeaways for today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I am now excited to jump into our bonus conversation with 86 Repair's CEO, Daniel Estrada, who shares how you can improve your margins simply by optimizing your repairs and your maintenance. Enjoy the discussion. Okay, I'm joined by Daniel Estrada, the co-founder and CEO of 86 Repairs. Daniel, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, glad to be here, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Daniel, in short, to kick things off, what is 86 Repairs? What are you guys all about?
Well, we manage the repair and maintenance process for restaurant operators. So in a nutshell, very simple at a high level, something breaks in the restaurant and our customers can send a request to 86. They can text us, they can call, they can submit a request through our mobile app, and we manage the whole process of getting it fixed. So we are a little bit different than some of the other R&M solutions out there. It's not just software and data, although we have a lot of that, probably more than anybody else. But we layer services on top of that. So we actually help operators make R&M proactive instead of constantly being something that they're reacting to.
So this is one of those things that, is very necessary in the industry to get right. Yep. A big opportunity, as we'll get into, for savings, but maybe not always top of mind for folks as they think about, what do my guests want? How do I do this or that? And they might not be thinking about the repairs and maintenance until, of course, they need to. Yep. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation to talk about this in a more proactive manner. But let's talk about the last few years, because the last few years, as I understand it, repairs and maintenance, this is been kind of a pain point for restaurant operators. Why is that the case?
Yeah, huge pain point. There are a couple things driving that. I mean, the primary thing I think operators haven't always thought about is that service companies, the companies who are doing the repair work, and even operators who are hiring in-house technicians, there's just a shortage of labor. There's a shortage of skilled trades labor, right? Just like operators have struggled with labor, service companies are struggling with labor. And the pandemic certainly accelerated that, but that was a problem before. I saw a stat the other day that something like 30% of electricians are retiring between now and 2029. So you've got all these people who are leaving skilled trades and they aren't being replaced. So that shortage has driven up costs. It takes longer to get folks to come and fix something. When they're there, it's more expensive because they're making more money, and also there are fewer of them. So that kind of supply-demand imbalance has really driven up costs. Since the pandemic, R&M costs are up about 31% across the industry. And just this year, first half of 2024, they were up about 8%. So the costs are continuing to go up. One thing I'll say is there are ways, and we can talk a little more about this, but there are ways for operators to manage this more proactively. And one of the things that we always advocate for is minimize how much service you actually need, right? So dispatch avoidance, right? Find ways to reduce the number of times you need to be sending those service companies out. So there are a few different ways to do that, but figuring out ways to be more proactive about this, as you said, is really critical in an environment where costs are continuing to rise.
Right. And you guys represent, to me, very much the sort of future of R&M and how you use this more highly technical, data-driven approach. What's the long-term, what have been the solutions for repairs and maintenance to date? What has that part of the industry looked like?
Well, it depends a little on, what size operator you are, right? A lot of operators that we talk to who are on the smaller end tend to have some kind of homegrown process. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's spreadsheets, right? Maybe a task management tool they're using internally to kind of manage the repairs that are happening. When you start getting a little bit bigger, 15, 20 units and above into multi-hundred unit operators, you start seeing CMMS platforms, software platforms that are basically ticketing systems to manage, repairs and maintenance requests. And then you also have some vendor marketplaces that are kind of built into those. So companies that are basically providing a marketplace of vendors that they've set up in their platform, and operators can pick and choose from those vendors. Part of the problem with those solutions is that business model hasn't really changed in decades. And so part of the reason that costs have gone up for service is that you've got these really transactional relationships in these marketplaces, right? It's like Uber for service, so you're creating a transactional relationship that's not a hospitality focused relationship in the way that industry is used to working with, which increases costs. And then because of the vendor labor shortage issues, there's also a lot more overhead for a service company having to work through all these different platforms. It's like all the third-party delivery tablets, right, that restaurants deal with. You've got all these different platforms and you have to connect in with them. And so it creates a lot of overhead and extra cost, and those costs get passed along to operators, to customers from those vendors. So that's kind of been the landscape and the way we've tried to solve these problems for the last 20, 30 years. And it's just not working anymore.
Sure. Well, it's so interesting to me too, because in this instance, there could also be some real urgency to the need for a repair.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, your whole business could hinge on a repair here. So that urgency, I just imagine, you mentioned that word relationship. I imagine there is a real critical relationship that's necessary here, because if you're in a pinch and you have this urgent need, something that needs to be fixed, you want it to be fixed right away. So how important are relationships to this?
Well, as you said, I think critical, and especially in a world where you have a very fragmented landscape of vendors, right? So not only are restaurants complex facilities, they have plumbing and electrical and fire suppression, and they have cooking equipment, right? Hot side, they have cold side equipment, right? Refrigeration. And oftentimes in local markets, you have lots of vendors that you're working with to solve those problems. And most of those service companies only cover a few of those categories at most. And so you've got all these different relationships, which is difficult to manage. It takes a lot of time. And then you have fragmented GMs, right, across your locations and markets, who are all making decisions and managing those relationships. And that tends to be very inconsistent as well. So it's just really important that the relationships exist, that you have some loyalty and frankly some buying power with service companies. And that can only exist in this fragmented landscape when there's clarity about who are your preferred vendors, who's doing the best job for you, and how you continue pushing more business to those companies so the relationships you have that are working continue getting more, getting fostered, and that you grow with your partners, with your vendor partners.
Well, and that begs the question too. I mean, I imagine there are differences here among independent restaurants, small chain, emerging chain restaurants, big chain restaurants. Explain to me how there are differences among types of operators and how they approach R&M.
Yeah, I would say, again, your smaller operators who tend to be more of your independents, often more of your full service, maybe fine dining or at least mid-scale dining restaurants. They tend to be a little bit smaller. And so for them, uptime is critical, as it is for every other segment, right? I have a lot of equipment typically in a full service restaurant. QSRs sometimes have a big equipment footprint, sometimes not. So the equipment footprint is different. The needs are different. The sense of urgency is often different because you have usually a career GM who's working in that restaurant, right? And typically being paid more in those restaurants. And so you have somebody who typically has a little bit more experience managing that process. So the vendor relationships and the data, the access to insights that those people have is really critical. When you start going into QSR, whether it's an emerging brand, even fast casual emerging brands or larger brands, you start seeing a little bit more process and infrastructure because you can't rely on the staff as much to have expertise. So you start seeing these CMMS platforms come up, software tools, right, that are these operators are using. And you start seeing in-house teams as well. So you have either an in-house facilities manager or in-house facilities team, and or maybe in-house technicians even who are going out and turning the wrench on the equipment.
And that Is that a luxury? I mean, I imagine this is the biggest chains we're talking about who have in-house teams, right?
Well, usually, yes, but it depends. I mean, we've seen small franchisees have in-house technicians. That model makes sense when you have some density geographically of your locations, right? Because a lot of times what folks don't think about is they might be paying an in-house technician fully loaded, let's call it $35, $40, $45 an hour. And that seems cheaper than paying a third-party service company $125 or $100 per hour, right, for the same labor. The difference is you're only paying for the labor when they're there doing work, whereas you're paying that technician for drive time, right, when it's your employee and you have the overhead of tools and a truck and, all the things that they need in order to do their job. So it can be a luxury. It can be cost effective. It can make sense for the right operator, but it depends on the setup. The facilities team can be a really important, really strategic role. Often we see that in development teams, construction teams, but your facilities managers really should be working on more strategic projects, right? Store refreshes, capital planning, remodels, the big stuff, choosing which equipment should be going into the restaurants, right, to maximize uptime and lower costs. So what we often see is that those folks are wasting time on leaky toilets and, clogged sinks and things like that when they should be spending their time on these bigger projects.
Okay, so you mentioned before about how technicians are retiring, costs are going up. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because, I imagine, when I take a step back and I look at the whole restaurant industry, I see technology becoming this solution to really fix all the problems, right? And so it's interesting to think in this day and age, with something that in my head, I'm like, okay, well, surely technology could fix this. Mm-hmm. It sounds like things are actually getting worse. Tell me about that. As we move along, are things getting worse with R&M? Have there become these solutions to help it stop getting worse?
Yeah. Well, again, we see costs going up. That's, I think, going to continue to happen for several years. I think one of the challenges that, again, legacy solutions, the way we've been trying to solve this problem in this industry hasn't worked. And I think the reason is this is a process issue and a people issue. It's not really a technology issue. It's not a software problem. And because R&M is a thing that happens in the physical world, right? You need somebody to show up and fix a piece of equipment. And every piece of equipment in a restaurant is critical to running the operation. So I think the reason this has gotten harder is because we're still trying to solve people and process problems with technology. And that's always a recipe for disaster. Now, data can provide insights when you have it, right? And help you make better decisions and make this more proactive. But that's not where we've seen the focus. So my advice to operators would be think of R&M in the ways that you can make it proactive and manage it proactively as a way to improve margins, reduce cost, right? Increase uptime, which maximizes revenue. Think about it that way instead of this thing that you're constantly just reacting to. And of course, I can put the pitch in for 86. The reason that we started the company is because we saw this problem, and our vision is to automate this process for operators and give them insights that help them make better decisions and really manage this proactively.
And I want to dig into specifically on how 86 works, but to start with, this idea of software kind of managing this issue of R&M. Mm-hmm. Explain to me how software can be a solution to ease the pain of the operator in dealing with this.
Well, software as a thing by itself is part of the solution, right? So you need to track and understand what's happening in the facilities. So if I'm an operator that, if I have a walk-in that's down, right, somebody being able to submit a request and quickly move that repair forward, you can improve that workflow with software. Software can track the warranty of that condenser that's installed in that walk-in, right, and can tell you if it's under warranty. It can tell you how much money you've spent fixing, that piece of equipment. So if you have a reach-in cooler or a fryer that you've already spent, $3,000 on, and it's a $4,000 piece of equipment, all of those insights can be valuable to make in-the-moment decisions. But a lot of operators don't have those insights because they don't really focus on R&M. They don't put a process in place, right, to make sure that that's being tracked. And so even with legacy software platforms, it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. Nobody is putting that data in, and so they don't get any real insight out. So it just becomes actually an extra chore for the staff, one more thing they have to do when they're already busy running the restaurant and doing 50 other things at any given time.
So 86 repairs specifically, say I'm a restaurateur,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, okay, I need help. I need a solution. 86 repairs, this looks like something that I could use. Tell me how I would engage with 86 repairs specifically and integrate it into my business.
So the thing that we do that's a little bit different is we really sell a process, right? That's what I always tell our team. And when we're talking with potential customers is, yes, we have software, yes, we have data, but what we're really selling is a better process so that when something breaks, those insights exist to make better decisions in the moment. And then proactively, the operator can make better decisions on things like optimizing the vendors they're working with, right? Back to the relationship conversation. How do I really optimize and streamline who I'm working with because I know how they're performing? And most operators just don't have that data. They don't know who's in the market, how those other service companies are performing, and they don't really know how the service companies are performing in their restaurants. They just have the gut feel of the manager, right? Who's like, oh, I really like working with Jimmy or with Tammy or whoever, right? And that's not really a good way to make a business decision. So what we try to do is we come in and we set up that process with the operator. We partner with them through our onboarding process, set up, the data they need to understand whether things are under warranty, managing troubleshooting effectively, managing repair replace decisions effectively, all that stuff. And so whether you work with 86 or not, that's one of my key pieces of advice for operators is find these ways inside your business to just improve the process, the way you're managing R&M. That's going to drive value. What we've seen with the third-party vendor marketplaces and software platforms is everyone's just trying to squeeze the service company, right? They're trying to get $2, $3, $5 out of the hourly rate, and it doesn't work. The costs are going up. That model is not working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about costs here because this is something you and I have talked about this in the past. I mean, you have said that R&M is one of the, if not the most controllable line item on the P&L. And I just imagine, I mean, when you look at today, I mean, food costs are going up, labor costs are going up. The P&L has become just, it's a mess for operators trying to find any kind of margin here. And so your pitch here is that R&M is one of those line items that you can kind of dig into and find savings. How is that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And we have been, as an industry, very focused on food and labor. They're big costs, right? It's a bigger line item. But those are not as controllable because you have commodities prices are going to do what they do. Labor cost, unfortunately, is going to do what it does. So, we're constrained in the way that we can manage those costs. R&M is much more controllable. So ways that I would advocate for reducing cost in the R&M line item is, number one, dispatch avoidance. Mentioned that a little bit earlier. What can I do to avoid sending service companies out when I don't really need them? Or rolling one of my technicians in when I don't really need that person. So that's things like troubleshooting, right? Having troubleshooting workflows in the business, training staff, how to troubleshoot things, right? Or working with a partner like 86 who will manage that process for you. Building out any kind of process improvements that you can to reduce communication gaps. So sending two vendors for the same issue, right? Tracking how much money has been spent on the equipment so you don't send a vendor out to, repair something that really should be replaced. Or on the flip side, that you're not spending so much money on a piece of equipment that you can't, that it doesn't make sense given the replacement cost of that equipment, right? Whether you decide to replace it or not, might just not be worth fixing. So workflow, communication, making sure that everybody who works in that restaurant, that your managers who are on duty at different times, all kind of know what's going on with the R&M process. That visibility is really important to help them make good decisions. So that's dispatch avoidance as a category. Then you have asset management, which is really about warranties, capital planning, right? Knowing when you've got equipment, how much money you expect to spend. We rolled out a pretty cool AI-driven forecasting tool that helps an operator see how much money we expect to spend by asset in the future on R&M. So just making those capital planning decisions, again, only possible when you're tracking how much money is being spent on those assets. And then I would say vendor management is the last big bucket. And again, that speaks to how do I optimize the relationships with the vendors who are doing the best work for me? Because quality drives cost down, right? First time fix rates is an example. How frequently that vendor has to show up, that's going to increase cost, availability of parts, things like that. So anything you can do to optimize that vendor mix is hugely critical. And so there is, even though I don't think I've seen the proof that squeezing service companies and hourly rates is not a winning strategy, there are ways to manage those vendor relationships more effectively.
I want to unpack a couple of things here, and as it relates to the future, because kind of with an eye, of course, on the future and where this all goes from here. You said the magic buzzword AI. AI is everywhere. I was at FS Tech a couple weeks ago, and it's just everywhere you turn, AI.
Yep.
We all know AI is our future, for better or worse, right? And we're all, as consumers, even using ChatGPT or whatever it might be. But I just think about AI and data, and the whole premise of AI and data is how it continues to get smarter. It continues to learn that this isn't just a thing that exists. Here you go, get the upgrade later. It continues to collect and learn. And so I'm curious from your perspective at looking at the future, with 86 Repairs being so driven by data, having AI resources, how in the future does this continue to learn and grow to the benefit of the operator?
Yeah, that's a big topic and a big question. I think for us, the way we think about AI is it has to be additive in the experience. And a lot of times we're seeing AI just built in as a marketing, tool to be able to say, oh, we have AI, we use AI. That's the wrong way to think about it from my perspective. And again, especially because we work in the physical world, right? AI will never be able to show up and fix a fryer, right, for food that I am preparing. Now, robots may in 50 years, right, be able to fix themselves, but that the AI topic in software, I think, has been really centered around how can we just use AI so we say we're using it. In our case, it's what are the specific use cases that actually help the operator make a better decision. So, I mentioned the example on capital planning. I was talking to a CFO of a mid-sized franchisee, a Wendy's franchisee, and just being able to understand how to forecast spend, even when there's no data, right? They have no history on any of their assets. Even if you have no past history, we can take the data that we have about similar assets in our data set, how much money is spent annually, how often those things have to be repaired, and we can use that data to extrapolate how much money an operator is going to spend on this type of fryer or this type of griddle or, a reach-in cooler. So being able to use data we already have to help the customer gain an insight and make a better capital planning decision, that's a great use of AI. Building a chatbot for service technicians, not a great use of AI, okay, for some obvious reasons, but being able to figure out where in the business that makes sense. And also for the operator, operators who are evaluating AI tech in their own restaurants and other parts of the business, just knowing who you are, right, I think is such a critical thing. If you're a full service restaurant, if you're a fine dining restaurant, you're trying to optimize for different things than a QSR is optimizing for. So just thinking about that from the perspective of your business, I think is really important.
Well, the other angle here I wanted to unpack for the future, and I know you're in the software business, not in the repair business yourself, but with such a finger on the pulse of this business and what you explained to me about this sort of danger of technicians retiring, and I'm just curious your perspective on the future of R&M and how can the restaurant industry ensure that there will be a constant flow of experts, technicians, vendors who will be there to help them.
Yeah, that's a tough one. The problem isn't getting a lot better right now. I think there has been a bit of a social reset on skilled trades, right? I'm seeing people start prioritizing the skilled trades as great career paths for folks who are starting their careers. So I think that's promising and that will help to some extent, but that's not going to happen fast enough to deal with the shortage. So again, I think the future of R&M is, can you manage this proactively? Can you reduce cost by avoiding unnecessary service, right? We hear a lot of horror stories from our customers, and before they work with us, what is, managers approving $4,000 worth of repairs on a, $3,000 piece of equipment, miscommunications happening, all that stuff. So being able to manage this more effectively is really the only way to reduce cost. R&M, one of the things we hear a lot in the equipment space is around IoT, right? Internet of Things. So having sensors in the equipment that help to predict failures. And we have some customers, running sensors, and we manage those alerts for them. That can help reduce downtime. There is an opportunity there to reduce downtime when, your manager might not notice there's a problem, but the sensor knows immediately when a cooler isn't temping, for example. So being able to be more proactive, there are some technology solutions to help do that. But IoT is a long ways away, I think, from maturity in the restaurant industry for a bunch of reasons. And so because of that, this is going to continue to be a process, a thing that needs human intervention and action in the physical world, right? We can get more proactive about it, but this is going to continue to be capital equipment that we spend a lot of money on, make big investments in, and have to manage more effectively.
For sure. All right, Daniel, last question for you. Sure. Such a important issue right now, particularly considering the environment, the economy in this place where operators are looking for savings. They're trying to improve their margins. They're struggling to get customers in, so they're re-examining their P&L to find those savings. So I think this is really timely that we're having this conversation and bringing 86 Repairs into that conversation. So make your pitch. Why is 86 Repairs really ready for this moment? Why is it the solution that you feel like restaurant operators should employ to find those savings?
It's a good question. I'll go back to the very beginning of the company. My business partner, who I started 86 with, worked in the food equipment business. He ran a company that makes all the bread slicers for Panera and Einstein's Bagels and big grocery retailers and everyone in between. And the pain point that he saw there was getting things fixed is hard. It's expensive. It takes time. It distracts folks from the restaurant. And so the pitch I would make for 86 isn't really about just what we do today, but it's about where we started. We started by digging into that problem and understanding the operator workflow and the service provider workflow. And, we mapped out that process and we built the solution around the feedback we were hearing from customers. And again, the feedback we were hearing from potential customers, from operators, wasn't give me more software to manage my restaurant. It was, I have a pain around managing R&M that some software can solve some parts of that, but I need people solving other parts of that problem. So we layered software and data and a services component together in order to drive that solution. And that has not changed. That is still a core focus for our business. We can sell you software, we can give you data, there's value in that by itself, but to solve the end-to-end R&M process, you need to understand what's happening in all the different steps. And we did that hard work up front to build that workflow out and to be able to give our customers a better process that's ultimately going to improve their margins.
Amazing. Well, exciting to see. Good luck to you, Daniel. And, being able to help operators find those savings, obviously an important job. So really appreciate that you guys are doing that.
Thank you.
Thanks again for your time.
Yeah, and thanks for doing this. You're doing a lot to help the industry as well. So it's great to see these conversations.